The return of Jesus and the apocalypse have already happened, but no one has read the text that shows when Jesus said he would return. And today I am going to show you in the Bible that Jesus never promised to return in our time. He promised to return in his generation. He returned in judgment on Jerusalem in the year 70 AD, and the new covenant began in full after that. In Matthew 24:34, it is written, "This generation will not pass away until all these things take place." A generation is approximately 30 to 40 years. Jesus said this around the year 30 AD, and the destruction of the temple took place in the year 70 AD. That is, within the generation that he said would happen. The word coming, also known as parousia, does not mean him physically descending from heaven. In the Old Testament, God came when he wanted to judge a nation. Examples of this, in Isaiah 19:1, the Lord comes upon Egypt, but no one saw God physically. It was judgment upon that nation. And in Micah 1:3, the Lord leaves his place and descends. It was also judgment against Samaria, and no one saw God physically, only the judgment. The coming of Jesus was the judgment of the Old Covenant and the end of Israel as a religious system. The entire chapter of Matthew 23 speaks about Jerusalem and not about the world. In Matthew 23:36, he says, "All this will come upon this generation." And in the next verse, he says, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem." It is very clear that the judgment here was on Israel and not on all of humanity. In Matthew 16:28, it is written, "Some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." If Jesus' coming is in the future, where are the disciples alive today? In Matthew 24:3, the disciples ask, "When will all this be? When will your coming be and the end of the age?" It was the Jewish age. It was the age of the temple, the age of the law, the age of sacrifices, not the end of the world. Jesus responds by describing famine, wars, signs in the sky, persecution, and the gospel being preached to everyone of that time. In Mark 13:10, Jesus says, "For before the end comes, the gospel must be preached to all peoples." But in Colossians 1:23, Paul says, "The gospel has been preached to every creature under heaven." In Matthew 24:15, Jesus says, "You will see the great terror spoken of by the prophet Daniel in the holy place." And what did the prophet Daniel say? In Daniel 9:27, he speaks of a king who would make a 7-year agreement with many peoples. Keep this information in mind, an agreement that would last 7 years, but when half that time had passed, he would put an end to animal sacrifices, and the great abomination would be placed in the highest place in the temple as God had decided. Now, an important detail. Revelation 11:2 says, "But do not measure the outer court of the temple, for it has been given to the pagans, who will trample on the holy city for 42 months. 42 months is equal to 3 years and 1/2 years, which is exactly half of 7 years. The same period appears in Daniel 9:27. The pagans were the Roman Empire, which destroyed the temple in the year 70 AD. If the sacrifices ended, then the great terror that would be placed in the temple has already happened. Returning to Matthew 24, Jesus says, "Whoever is in Judea, flee to the mountains." If it were the end of the world, why should only Judea flee? Because it was a local judgment. In Revelation 1:11, when Jesus tells John to send letters to the churches in Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea, these churches were in Asia Minor, which is now modern-day Turkey. And today, none of these churches exist because they were destroyed almost 2,000 years ago. In other words, the letters were sent to real churches of that time with real problems of that generation. If Revelation were for our generation, then why would Jesus tell John to write to the churches of Asia, since those churches no longer exist? It would be the same as Jesus telling you to write to the church of ancient Rome, since that church no longer exists today. It only makes sense if it was meant for the recipients of the year 70 AD. This means that Jesus is not late, but that he has already fulfilled what he promised.